I never planned to become a foster parent. It wasn't part of some noble dream or a carefully crafted life plan. It simply happened. 3 years ago, when Michael stepped into our home, he was a quiet 15-year-old boy with guarded eyes and a suitcase that looked heavier than his thin frame could handle. My husband, Daniel, had insisted we take him in. "He just needs stability," Daniel had said, placing a hand on my shoulder with that familiar confidence that often convinced me to agree. Michael didn't speak much in the beginning. He moved through the house like a shadow, silent, careful, as if he was terrified of taking up space. But over time, something shifted. He began to help me in the kitchen, asking small, hesitant questions. He started calling Daniel Sir, with a hint of respect that made Daniel beam with pride. Slowly, we became a family, or at least something close to it. Daniel adored him. He'd take him out for basketball games on weekends, teach him how to fix the old car, give him advice like a father who finally had someone willing to listen. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a mix of admiration and distance. There were moments when I wondered if Daniel was more patient with Michael than he had ever been with me. But I brushed those thoughts aside. After all, this was what family was supposed to look like, imperfect but whole. By the time Michael turned 18, our house had changed. He was no longer the quiet boy who hid behind closed doors. He had grown into a confident young man with an easy laugh and a presence that filled every corner. He spent late nights studying in the living room, drinking endless cups of coffee, and talking to Daniel about life, college, and everything in between. And yet, something in the air began to feel different. Subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. Daniel had become strangely distant from me, distracted during our conversations, his phone always tilted away from my line of sight. Michael, too, had grown quieter around me, not in the shy way of before, but in a way that suggested there were words left unspoken. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Families evolve, teenagers grow, and marriages go through phases. That's what I told myself. But one evening, as I walked past the living room and caught a fleeting glance between Daniel and Michael, something inside me shifted. It was a look I couldn't quite define, familiar, intense, and entirely out of place. I paused, hand resting on the doorframe, heart thudding louder than the ticking clock on the wall. Something was changing in my home, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what. The weeks that followed that unsettling glance were like living in a house where the furniture had been quietly rearranged overnight. Everything looked the same on the surface, yet nothing felt in its right place. I began to notice things I hadn't before, small details that seemed inconsequential on their own, but together formed a picture I couldn't ignore. Daniel's schedule changed first. He started coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations about extra work or impromptu meetings. His excuses were delivered casually, but his eyes would dart away at the end of every sentence. Meanwhile, Michael's presence around the house became unpredictable. Some nights he stayed up later than anyone else, and other nights he disappeared into his room the moment Daniel walked through the door, as if avoiding being caught in some silent exchange. At dinner, the three of us used to talk easily. But lately, conversations stumbled over awkward pauses. Daniel and Michael exchanged quick looks, quiet chuckles that didn't include me. When I tried to join in, the mood shifted, like I was interrupting a scene I wasn't meant to witness. It was a subtle exclusion, but it cut deeper each time. One Saturday evening, while preparing dinner, I heard laughter drifting in from the backyard. Peeking through the kitchen window, I saw Daniel and Michael shooting hoops under the fading orange sky. They were close, too close. There was an ease between them, a shared rhythm I couldn't penetrate. As Michael made a perfect shot, Daniel clapped him on the back with a warmth I hadn't felt from him in months. My chest tightened. I wasn't jealous of their bond. I was unsettled by the way it seemed to eclipse everything else. Later that night, when Daniel came inside, his shirt damp with sweat, I casually asked, "Did you two have fun out there?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second before flashing that practiced smile. "Yeah, it was good. He's got talent." I nodded, forcing a grin, but inside, Unease crawled up my spine like a shadow I couldn't shake. As days turned into weeks, my instincts grew sharper. I began noticing whispers behind closed doors, text messages that made Daniel's expression soften in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Once, passing by Michael's room late at night, I heard muffled voices. Daniel's and Michael's. Low, intimate, not the typical parent-child conversations I was used to. When I knocked, silence fell instantly. Daniel emerged moments later, saying he'd just been checking in. It was then that a seed of doubt took root. Not wild suspicion, but a quiet, persistent question. What was really happening between them? And perhaps more hauntingly, why was I the last to notice? It happened on a quiet Thursday night. The kind of night when the house usually exhaled after a long day. When dishes were washed, lights dimmed, and silence settled like a soft blanket. But that night something tugged at me. A faint sound, laughter, echoed down the hallway, muffled but unmistakably familiar. I followed the sound, barefoot on the cold floor, heart pounding in my chest with every step. The laughter grew clearer as I neared Michael's room. His door was slightly ajar, a warm strip of light spilling onto the dark hallway. I paused, fingers hovering near the frame, debating whether to knock. A part of me whispered to walk away. But curiosity, no instinct, pushed me forward. Inside, Daniel and Michael were sitting close on the edge of the bed. Daniel's hand rested lightly on Michael's shoulder, their faces lit with a kind of warmth that startled me. It wasn't inappropriate, not exactly, but it was intimate in a way that didn't belong in that room at that hour. For a moment, they didn't see me. I watched silently, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Then Daniel turned. Our eyes met, and something shifted in the air. He jumped to his feet, his expression a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "I was just talking to him," he said quickly, as though rehearsing. Michael looked down, avoiding my gaze completely. "About what?" I asked, my voice steadier than the storm building inside me. "Nothing important. He was just upset," Daniel replied, running a hand through his hair. I was trying to comfort him. It might have been believable, if not for the way Michael's eyes glistened, or the unspoken electricity that hung between them. Later that night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake replaying every glance, every late-night whisper, every unexplained moment. My mind assembled the fragments like a cruel puzzle, each piece fitting too perfectly. The breaking point came the next afternoon. Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was outside. I shouldn't have looked, but something in me needed the truth. The messages weren't explicit, but they were undeniable. Late-night check-ins that blurred into confessions, inside jokes that excluded me, emotional exchanges that belonged to a realm I no longer occupied. And one message from Michael that froze me entirely. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this between us." My hands trembled as I set the phone down. Every doubt that had once felt irrational now had a heartbeat. When Daniel walked in moments later, our eyes met, and for the first time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, loud, and final. It said everything we had both been too afraid to admit. Something fundamental had broken, and I could feel the pieces shifting beneath my feet. The hours that followed felt like moving through thick fog, everything familiar, yet nothing clear. Daniel tried to keep the house running as if nothing had happened, but silence had settled between us like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. We avoided each other's eyes, our conversations reduced to practicalities: bills, groceries, schedules. The warmth that once filled these walls had drained away, leaving only echoes of what used to be. I spent most of my time in the study, staring at the same page of a book I couldn't read. Every so often, my thoughts drifted back to that single message on Daniel's phone. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this between us." It replayed like a broken record, each repetition pulling another thread from the fabric of my trust. Michael kept his distance too. He avoided me in the hallways, his once bright greetings replaced by muttered good mornings and closed doors. The boy who had once tiptoed carefully through this house had grown into a man carrying a secret that fractured it. I caught glimpses of guilt in his eyes, but guilt without explanation only deepened the ache. One evening, I asked Daniel to sit down at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd shared countless meals, laughter, and plans for the future. He looked tired, almost relieved, like a man who had been waiting for this confrontation. "Tell me the truth," I said. No shouting, no theatrics, just the quiet demand of someone who deserved honesty. Daniel hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "I never meant to cross that line. He needed someone, and I got lost in trying to be everything." The words hit me like cold rain. There it was, not an elaborate story, not excuses, just a confession wrapped in exhaustion. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the quiet crumble of something I once thought was unshakable. Michael came forward days later, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want it to happen," he said, eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't know how to stop it without breaking everything." His honesty was raw, painful. I believed him, and hated that I did. The decision to separate wasn't explosive. It was quiet, almost inevitable. Daniel moved into the guest room first, then out of the house entirely. Michael left for college soon after. The distance between us no longer just emotional but physical too. Some nights, I walked through the empty hallway and paused by Michael's door. Now closed, silent, just like everything else. The house still stood, but it didn't feel like home anymore. And somewhere beneath the rubble of betrayal, I realized the truth. Sometimes endings don't arrive with loud goodbyes. They settle quietly like dust, until one day you look around and see that everything has changed. It's been a year since that night when everything quietly unraveled. Time, as I've learned, doesn't heal in straight lines. Some days, the pain feels distant, like a memory softened by fog. Other days, it returns without warning, sharp and sudden, reminding me that healing is less about forgetting and more about learning to live with what remains. Daniel and I finalized the divorce months ago. There were no dramatic courtroom battles, no tearful reunions. Just 2 signatures on crisp white paper, and the quiet acknowledgement that our story had ended long before the ink dried. Occasionally, I catch his updates through mutual friends. New apartment, new job, a life separate from mine. I don't feel hatred anymore. Just a strange, bittersweet detachment, like looking at an old photograph of a place I once called home. Michael left for college shortly after everything came to light. The last time I saw him, he stood by the car with his suitcase, shoulders tense, eyes full of apologies he couldn't quite form into words. I wanted to say something profound, something that would untangle the mess between us, but the words caught in my throat. In the end, I simply said, "Take care of yourself." And he nodded, as if we both understood that some wounds can't be mended with a single conversation. The house has grown quieter since then. The laughter that once filled its corners has been replaced by the gentle hum of solitude. I've redecorated the living room, painted the walls a warm terracotta, and moved the furniture around. It's a small act, but it's mine, a way of reclaiming the spaces where the silence once felt suffocating. I've also started walking in the evenings. There's a trail behind the neighborhood that winds through a cluster of trees. I didn't even know it existed before. Daniel always drove past it, too busy or too tired to stop. Now it's my ritual. With each step, I let my thoughts untangle. Sometimes I think about what happened, not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. If there's one thing this entire experience has taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't just end a relationship. It forces you to rebuild yourself from the inside out. I used to define my life through the people I loved, Daniel's ambitions, Michael's growth, the family I tried to hold together. Now, for the first time in years, I'm learning to define it through me. The past will always be a part of my story, a chapter written in ink I can't erase. But it doesn't have to dictate the rest of the book. And as I lock the front door each evening, stepping out onto that quiet path beneath the fading sky, I remind myself, sometimes survival isn't loud or triumphant. Sometimes it's simply choosing to keep walking. For more video, please subscribe to our channel.